Hi, everyone. Hi, my name is Alicja Foksińska, and I guess we'll jump straight in. That was such a great intro video. Thank you so much for having me in your chapter. Happy Ramadan to all of you. I know it is late at night, so I'm so happy that you're able to join this meeting and just having me here. I'm very honored. Let us jump straight in.
Yeah, Alicja, thank you so much. I had a problem with opening my mic and a video, so thank you for taking this over. Now I am here. So you already made the opening ceremony. Thank you so much. But a quick words from my end. Welcome everyone to our bi-weekly ISACA Istanbul chapter events. I am Ceylan İşcanlı. Today I will be the moderator. Before we jump into our session, I would like to remind you quick notes. First, we will be sending, as we are doing in every event, we will be sending a survey via chat at the end of our meeting, after our event. And if you fill this survey at the end, you will be able to claim a 1.5 CPE for this event. And the other points, at the end of our event, we will have approximately 10-15 minutes for Q&A. However, if you have any question during this event, please do not hesitate to raise over the chat. I will be reading out and reading it out loud to Alicja. And also, if you have any question, you can also open your mic and video to raise your question. We will be more than happy to have this session interactively. And today, we are welcoming Alicja Foksińska from ISACA Birmingham Chapter. She's the president of the Birmingham Chapter. And we will be talking about today the data visualization and storytelling in internal audit. So thank you, Alicja, for accepting our invitation, and welcome again.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Things happen during webinars, during virtual meetings, so I'm very happy to be very flexible and jump in. So thank you so much for the introduction and to get started. Just as I was introduced, my name is Alicja Foksińska, and there is on that slide soon to be Alicja Arnold. So you might start seeing my new last name appear after August, as I'm going to be getting married at the end of August. So that's going to be a change, especially when you follow me on LinkedIn. I'm a CISA certified CFD and Tableau desktop specialist, which we will cover in a few slides. But first, I wanted to make sure, thank you for the congratulations. Where am I from? So the name Alicja Foksińska is not from United States. I am originally from a small town called Czechowice-Dziedzice in Poland, which is just right there on the southern border of Poland. So I moved to United States, and now I live in Birmingham, Alabama. So it is in the middle of Alabama, and with us being in the middle of Alabama, the city being called Birmingham, a lot of times I get messages from ISACA members who live in United Kingdom asking me if they can join the Birmingham chapter, and I have to tell them we're located in USA. So that's why I am the president of the Birmingham chapter that happens to be located in United States. But that's where my name came from. So I do speak Polish and I do speak English on a regular basis. A little more about me and my experiences. So first of all, my full-time job, I work at Protective Life Corporation that is located in Birmingham, Alabama. Protective Life is a life insurance and annuity company, and I specialize in IT audit. I'm a lead IT auditor there, and my specialization within IT audit is data analytics, visualization, and storytelling. I'm also a first edition author of a textbook that is published by Wiley, and it was just published a couple months ago in February. I'm one of the co-authors, so there were 3 of us who wrote the textbook. And the textbook is on accounting information systems. So a very important topic, especially in the realm of accounting. So the textbook is going to be used within accounting courses. I'm also an instructor at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. I am an instructor of accounting information systems. So we use the book that we wrote to teach accounting information systems. And within that, of course, IT audit would fall into it, as well as just regular auditing, external auditing, data analytics within that class. And then I also teach a separate class on data visualization. And then, of course, that was mentioned, I am the current president of ISACA Birmingham Chapter. I started my presidency in May of 2020, and my presidency is running out soon. So I'm very sad that that's coming to an end within the next month, but it was quite the adventure to be a president for the past 2 years, and I'm very happy I had that opportunity. And here's the textbook. So I wanted to make sure it's actually found on Amazon. It's available on Amazon, but it is a textbook that's comprised of 18 different chapters. So if you are interested, that is something that I was able to write. And ISACA is mentioned multiple times within the different chapters, as well as COVID-19. And if you know, some of you might know Mark Thomas. He is one of our featured professionals in the textbook as well. So certifications, I'm a CISA certified fraud examiner, or CFE, as well as Tableau specialist. And so let's get to the main event of what you showed up for. It's not my background. You showed up here to learn all about data visualization and storytelling. So we will be covering what is data storytelling. We will be covering a chart for every occasion, because there's different charts to use. Just like you would not use different tools, hammers, saws, to use for different projects. The same thing is with data and visualization. Whenever you have certain types of data, you can only sometimes use certain types of charts. And then I'll show a couple of internal audit visualization examples that I've created back most recently as well. So what is storytelling? When you think of storytelling, you probably picture somebody sitting around the room, everyone listening to a person telling a story, whether it's something about their history, their past, or a spooky story, scary story, or whatnot, and people sharing their stories. But what a lot of people don't realize is storytelling happens in our offices. So this is what we storytell all the time when we're in meetings. So if you have a presentation up on the board, or at your workplace, or virtually, you're constantly storytelling when you're presenting to others. So a lot of people forget that piece, that storytelling is not just for kind of the social events or kind of social meetings. It's also in our workplaces. And why is storytelling important? Storytelling is very important because it makes your case sticky. And what I mean by that is you remember things much more than when you start using storytelling within your kind of data analytics. So at this point, if you're using storytelling, that means someone else might be able to more readily recall what you were trying to tell them, because you're going to be using anecdotes and kind of stories that will help that person recall whatever they're learning about. Without stories, it's kind of jumbled. It's a mess in someone's head. They might not realize why are you even telling me the story? Sometimes you need a story to organize your thoughts. Sometimes you might have had, you might have been speaking to someone and you might have told them, okay, can you get to the point? Like, why are you even telling me this? Because someone might be just saying a lot of words, but they might not actually get to the point. So storytelling also allows you to not only organize those thoughts to make sure that you're going from one point A, B, C, D, and go through the entire story, but it's also helping you to drive that point across to make sure that your end goal and your audience understands why you're even storytelling. And MIT, so there is a school in the United States called MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and the Sloan School of Business actually published this article called "The Next Chapter in Analytics is Data Storytelling." What people are having problems with is not the, they're not having problems with the data analytics per se. It's taking data analytics and then telling the story, presenting it using the visualizations, so using charts, and then the next step is the data storytelling. So you have a bunch of data scientists who are readily available to give you the data. They're giving you all of that information, but now you need to make sure that you're able to communicate, because data alone and information alone without that communication piece is absolutely useless. And one piece of it is the skill of data storytelling, and I really like this quote, is removing the noise and focusing people's attention on those key insights. And that's exactly what I was talking about, making your point, organizing your thoughts, and making sure that at the very end of your presentation, people know why they were listening to your presentation. So you're trying to remove all of the, oh, here's data, here's this, here's that. You're wanting to organize it in a way where people have key takeaways. And the question that you want them to answer is, so what? Why should you care about listening to this presentation about your data analytics? Well, you should care because, and here's where you would be answering that question through the use of data. So let me launch a quick poll. You should be able to see a quick polling question. And the question is very simple. Who are your favorite storytellers? Is it songwriters? So people who write songs, authors, people who write books, artists, painters, sculptors, movies, so screenwriters who write movie scripts, playwrights when you go to the theater. Great participation. Thank you. And as you're answering the question, think about why you enjoy those storytellers. So let me share results, because I know people are always curious about what other people have said. So a lot of you, some of the best storytellers or your favorite storytellers are people and authors, so people who write books. And what I usually say is that's my first step, is to just look at the beauty of storytelling in each one of these categories. So next time you hear a song, break it down and see what kind of stories is that songwriter trying to tell you? What kind of story is the book? So books are fairly easy to figure out the story. Hopefully there is a story in the book, or else the book wouldn't exist. But within paintings, so when you look at a painting, what kind of story is the artist trying to tell? Sometimes it might be hidden in a detail, and that's very important. Sometimes they might use certain colors to draw your attention to the main point that they're trying to get to. And also movie writers, and theater, sometimes they use certain things, colors, characters, a certain song in the movie in order to kind of drive the point across. So one of my favorite storytellers is, of course, Walt Disney. And Walt Disney, the beauty of storytelling within Walt Disney, and something that I take away when I do data analytics storytelling, is making sure that you use, or I use cue cards or sticky notes, a little piece of paper. And how I use it is just like Walt Disney and his team uses it. So on the screen, you can see the different cue cards or just note cards that they have just sketched a character. So I think that's Donald Duck that's being sketched through, and it's trying to tell a story. The reason that they do this first is because they're going to move things around. Sometimes when they are telling a story, they might realize, oh, we have a gap in our story. So we need to fill it in with a backstory, or we need to fill it in with details that your audience now needs to understand to get to understand the whole story that you're trying to tell. Sometimes you might realize that that's too many details. Your audience doesn't even need any of this in order to get to the point. So what's very important is whenever I storytell with data is I write it out on sticky notes, and then I put it together on a dry erase board on my table to see, does it make sense when I walk the audience from point A and I go from point A to point B, point C chronologically, or am I missing some details? The reason I start off very simple, pen and paper, is because I don't want to put a lot of time and effort into creating the end product, knowing that I'm going to be moving things around. So how does this look using kind of Disney's boards? So here's an example of Disney's boards, and the example is of the movie Cinderella. So they were able to put that on the board here, and when they were very happy, they turned this sketch into an actual, they put time, effort, talent into creating the actual image of Cinderella. So instead of having this pencil, although this is a very nice sketch of pencil that I would not be able to do in under a minute, obviously this sketch on the left-hand side of your screen took much shorter to create than the one on the right-hand side. So the same thing works for data analytics. You're going to be using a lot of data. So you're going to say, okay, I think this is going to work well in a bar chart. It's going to tell this, this is the data, and whatever the story that the data is going to tell is going to work well in a bar chart or a line chart. But before you start actually making those bar charts and line charts, you want to make sure you're happy with them, and then you start creating it. So you're not wasting time to create all of those, especially when it comes to Tableau or Power BI. If you're using those tools, it's going to take you maybe a little longer to create the whole story deck that management might say, I don't need this slide, I don't need this slide, or I need this a little placed a little differently. Then what happens is, this is the end goal, is they take all of these sketches and turn it into an actual product. So they go from the sketch, they go from that picture. So we just saw this picture, and now they're putting all of those images together in order to create a cohesive story. So the last drawing here is the last frame that you see in this video clip. So they were able to put all of these little sketches, and as you can tell, the sketches were just blocks of ideas that they were able to seamlessly put into this beautiful data story, or beautiful story, not data story. But we're going to be the ones telling the data story.
Alicja,
yes.
Can I ask you something here?
Yeah.
What is in the center of storytelling? What is the main reason of having this storytelling? Is it the process, or the main reason is to reach the end destination, to pointing out the last destination, or storytelling means the drawing the edges and the telling it from beginning to end as a process? Because when we say data, it is more specific at the end, a number or some numerics. But when we say storytelling, it's more of a process, right?
Yes, and that's a great question. And I think it leads beautifully into this slide here. And that is the process of storytelling. So that storytelling is to make the ending point, but it depends on where you want to put that ending point. So the classic storytelling arc here is you have to have the beginning, the middle, and the end. So you're going to give the introduction, the rising action. So what is the problem? What's the problem? Why are we even meeting here today to talk about change management, for example? So you're going to say, oh, in my company, we perform change management this way. And you're going to tell them how change management works. And then you're going to say the turning point. Well, there is an issue. Somebody did not approve the change, and now we have a failure in the process. And then you're going to tell them the following steps or the following action steps to how you're going to resolve. As an auditor, obviously you don't resolve the problem, but the business would tell you the resolution. So in order for us to not have the control fail again, what we're going to do is we're going to do 1, 2, and 3 things, for example. But if you really have to know your audience. So if your audience is one that needs to know the problem right away, a lot of you might think about people that you're working with. Sometimes that person can get to the point, like, what's the problem? Just give me the problem first and then tell me the backstory. When we do presentations with or audits, we have to see who is our business leader that we're presenting to, and do we start talking about the findings first and then we discuss how we got to the findings, or do we start talking about the process and then the findings at the end? So you really have to see and know who the audience is in order to understand how your story is going to be structured. A lot of people want a lot of background information. So this is where, if you had the person who wants to hear all about the background. So we had one auditor who did change management testing between this and this time period. So at the beginning of the year until now, they realized there's 5,000 changes that occurred during that time period. Out of those time periods, we realized that there were from 5,100 changes that were not approved in the proper in a timely manner, and so that's going to be a change management finding. Or you can just start the conversation with, there's going to be a change management finding. The reason behind you having a change management finding is because we tested 5,000 changes out of 5,000 and you shifted the story depending on who you're talking with. So I hope that answers a little bit of that question.
Yes, great, thank you.
Thank you. So this is essentially how the story is laid out, and now if we're focusing on data storytelling, and I think this is what you were also alluding to, is looking to make sure that you have a data storytelling component. You must have the data. Obviously, you got to storytell about something. So data is the most important. Then you need to have a story around your data. So your data is driving that story. And then lastly, you of course need the visuals in order to show people what you mean by the data. So here is the 3 circles that they kind of overlap. And when you have the data and the story, you're able to explain something. When you have data and you have visuals, you can enlighten someone. And then when you have the story and the visuals, but you don't have the data, you can engage someone. So you really want to have all three pieces, because all three pieces create that kind of what we call a sweet spot. So that is the spot that you want to have. You want to make sure that you have the data, you then create visuals, and you have that story, and all three work together. The most important part of the data storytelling formula, and I had to make it in red, in bold, it is data in your analysis must come first. And that's in order to avoid you having a story and then fitting the data into it. It's the other way around. You have to have the data first. Then you got to look at what is the data actually telling you. So you have to listen to the data first, and the data will tell you a story. And that is how you start the storytelling aspect of it. You get the data, you do the analysis, you look at what the results are of the analysis, and that's how you can tell the story around it, not the other way around. So there's a word of caution, of course, when it comes to data analytics and data storytelling, that we have to be pretty, they're pretty, like the next 3 points are pretty significant, I would say. The first one, your correlation is not, or correlation is not causation. So the chart here is more of a funny chart where you have your ice cream sales and shark attacks, and they overlap, and you feel like you can say when ice cream sales increase, shark attacks increase. And then when ice cream sales decrease, shark attacks decreases, which is not true. This is not where one does not cause the other. They might be correlated, but you cannot say one causes the other. It's caused because, number one, it's warmer, at least this chart is obviously United States based. So our summer months are June, July, August. In those months, which is the peak here, that is our summer months. It is warm. People go out to the beach. People swim at the beach. More sharks appear. So that's why there's more shark attacks. Not a lot of people swim in January. And there's, of course, no sharks swarming in January. And then, of course, ice cream sales. You usually eat ice cream during warmer months. So the causation is it's getting warmer. People are going out to the beach. They're enjoying their swims. That's why ice cream sales are going up. Shark attacks are going up. So that's one thing in, you know, it's a very, it's a funny example. And you might say, well, of course, they're not causing one another. But I think in business, when you start looking at data, that's something that you have to keep in mind is when you're about to present something, you're not going to say, well, our claim sales are driven by this because they're following the same path. Another thing to also keep in mind is something called data humanism. And data humanism, what it means is that there is data, or there are humans behind every piece of data, okay? So every single thing that the data is created for. So let's, some people wear watches to count their steps, right? When you're looking at, your step count, or how long you've ran, let's say 5 kilometers, that 5 kilometers, yes, that is a running distance that you as a human ran. So when you start talking about data, you have to realize who is your audience and who are you presenting about. So with internal audit, I work with a lot of data, of course, and I work for Protective Life, which is a life insurance company. So with life insurance, whenever someone files a claim, that means someone has died. So when someone picks up the phone and calls and they call to file a life insurance claim, that means somebody in their life has passed away. So that could be their mom, dad, loved one, husband, wife, or whatnot. So whenever we talk about our data, we just don't, we want to make sure that we're respectful of the data that we're presenting. So if you're talking about claims at life insurance company, for example, you might say, oh yeah, we had 500 claims this month. Well, that's 500 people who have also died because you have all of these claims. So you want to make sure that when you're just throwing numbers around and talking about the numbers, that you're being very respectful depending on what the numbers are, what the numbers mean. When I'm presenting about running and I said, you know, we had, I ran however many kilometers, I ran 5 kilometers today. That's, yeah, that talks about the human behind it, but it's not as a level of respect as somebody, because that is somebody's family member, that's somebody going through a grieving process. So instead of calling them, oh, okay, so you're filing a claim, the first thing that our call center people say is, I'm very sorry for your loss, before they do anything else. So make sure that your statistics also keep that human aspect in mind. And I really like this quote. And the quote that I highlighted kind of the most important part, we lose the sense of what data represents. So we want to make sure every single time you do data analytics, think about what do those numbers mean? The number of hours that somebody put in, so for example, doctors, right? Let's say they have worked in the ER overtime. Well, okay, that means there were a lot of sick people or a lot of people that required ER, so emergency room at the doctors, that kind of level of care if the doctors are working overtime. So that means there's something going on, more people are getting sick and whatnot. So that's very, very much something that you should keep in mind as you're presenting data visualizations. And the last point with kind of storytelling, and whenever you're presenting data before we start diving into actual visuals, is reading versus feeling. So whenever you're presenting data and showing your data visualizations, your charts, what is the point? Do you want to tell that story and have the person just read it, get the, understand the data, and that's it? Or do you want to evoke emotion? Do you want to make the person happy? Do you want to, will your chart make them angry or sad? So you also have to keep that in mind. So for example, using the color red in United States, that provokes the feeling of a warning. So if someone uses red in a report, your eyes are drawn to red, and in the United States, it would mean bad or warning, something like our stop signs are to draw your attention to stop. So if you're using the color red on your visualizations a lot, and you want the chart to be a happy chart, that's probably not the color you want to go with, because a lot of people are going to be worried. Like, are they presenting something bad, especially when it comes to business numbers? So if you're using numbers and the color red in the United States, that draws your attention and you're like, is that number good? Or is that number bad? Are the sales going down or the sales going up? So it's also having to do using appropriate colors in order to prevent people feeling a certain situation. So here is an example. It was published in a newspaper called the New York Times on March 27th, 2020. So this was about the beginning of COVID in the United States. The New York Times is a US-wide newspaper, and they published this front page cover. So the newspaper would kind of end here, they would fold it over, but when you open it up, it's a huge piece of paper, and this chart spans the entire, almost the entire front page of the newspaper. And so it's, when you're just looking at it, it might seem, okay, so it's charting, something's there's a chart. You don't know what we're charting here, but there's a huge spike. What happened here? So I did find a smaller chart to make sure that we fit it on the on one slide. So here's the chart that they published across the entire front page. The chart shows the jobless claims of United States citizens. So it showed the recession. So United States had a recession within 2008, 2009. So it showed a comparison. Like here's in 2004, here's in 2008. So people knew how bad recession was in the United States during those times. But we were not prepared to see this spike in March of 2020. There were over 22 million people who filed within the last 4 weeks during that time period a jobless claim. So this chart could provoke a lot of feelings. And you have to be very careful when you're showing it. Like, what do you want them to have those feelings? So obviously you might have feelings of sadness. That was a very sad time for a lot of people. A lot of people lost their jobs. And then anger. You're angry because you can't control the situation. People are losing jobs and you're just angry that this is happening, that COVID is happening, and you can't control it. You might have feelings of anxiousness. So if 22 million people lost their jobs, does that mean I'm next, right? So just looking at this chart alone it just really puts something in perspective, and it really makes you feel something as opposed to just reading it. So now that we've covered kind of our storytelling approach or storytelling overall best practices, let's dive into the visual aspect. So now that you have the data, you are able to tell a story. Now let's add some visuals into that. So in order to have a successful, of course, visual, you want to make sure that you're choosing an effective visual. So just like I alluded at the very beginning of the presentation, not all charts will work with your data. So there's certain data points that you cannot chart on the line chart. And we'll cover that in a second. Just like you would not use your cell phone to hammer in a nail, you would use a hammer to hammer in a nail instead of like your telephone. Number 2 is eliminating the clutter. So making sure that you don't have too many grid lines, that you really eliminate it down to what the person needs to see. And then the last but not least is focusing your audience's attention onto the points that you want them to see. And I'll show you a couple of items throughout the next couple of charts. So first, you've got a chart suggestion. So this is kind of a thought starter that I found online, and I found it very helpful when you don't know where to get started, and you know that you want to compare the data, for example. So you want to show a comparison between the data that you have, and you want to use a comparison over time. So it's going to be something around time, and there's many periods. So let's say there's many quarters that you want to look at, and it's non-cyclical, meaning that it's just a one after the other sequential time stamp. You would use a line chart. So I really enjoy this. It's definitely found on Google, so I do not take credit for this at all, but it's just a nice thing to just have on your computer. I have it saved up, saved on my computer in case I get stuck. and I need some inspiration of where to get started. So there's a lot of things that you can do when you're choosing a effective visual. You can choose anything from simple text all the way to a tree map. I feel like with every data visualization package, whether you're using Excel, whether you're using Power BI, Tableau, or any other outlets, they have just so many choices, and you might be overwhelmed of how do I get started? Where do I get started? So I wanted to walk you through kind of how you can make that data and get started on each one of these. So first, let's talk about simple text. Sometimes creating a chart might not be the answer. So here we have a very fine chart. So this chart tells you a story. It does tell you the story of overtime charges for call center employees. But if you're just comparing two things, for example, here, you can actually simplify it to something like simple text. And simple text will tell you straight away that 30% of call center employees charged overtime in 2019 compared to 40% in 2018. So you're telling them the same exact story, but just boiling it down to the data that you want them to see. And here's where, if I just gave you, let's go back to this one. If I just gave you this chart, you might say, okay, so 40% for 2018, 30% for 2019 overtime charges. So we went down, I guess, right? So if you did not have me telling you what I want you to get away from this chart or take away from this chart, you might make your own assumptions. When you start data storytelling, you want to drive that point so people don't have any questions. So this kind of drives that point. So you're telling them and you're making sure that they focus on the 30% and not necessarily the 40%. Although the comparison does tell you that we're going down in overtime charges, which is a great story, but you wanted management to see the 30% being kind of the key milestone that you're showing here. Then we're going to go and explore tables a little bit. So while tables are just very self-explanatory, they live in Excel. When you look at the table, the borders, when you look at the heavy borders, those draw your attention. So when you look at just the heavy borders and not go down, the first thing that you see is the black outline. You don't see the data, you see the black outline. So as you lighten the borders, so now you're going down to light borders, you start seeing the data a little more and less of the borders. And then of course, when you go minimal borders, you see the data first and not the borders. So here's where you have to make sure that what are you trying, where do you want the visual eyesight to go? Do you want them to look at the borders and pay attention to the headers of your data? So when you look at the heavy borders chart, you're looking at the words, the first words that come to your mind are employee age, 401k contribution, which is our retirement fund in the United States, and then dental insurance. Those are the words that you see first. When you go to the minimal borders, you start seeing a lot of data there. Now, tables are not the best to present data. Going and doing a step up from the tables would be turning a table into a heat map. So it's the same table that you see here, but just adding a little bit of color will help the reader draw their attention to, for example, high and low. So I did a very simple, if somebody's age is low, it's going to, and their contribution level, so 4% is a low amount, so it's going to be more on the white scale. High is going to be that dark shade of green. So you just took a very simple table, added some colors, and you were able to really bring out the story. So the person's eyesight goes directly to, for example, here, the highest level of contribution. So Maria, she's 56 years old and she contributes 25%. That's where your ISAC goes. And on the opposite side, it goes to Adele, who's 29 years old and only contributes 4%. So you get to see kind of the max and the minimum right away just by applying a little bit of color. So the next chart is the scatter plot. Here's something I do in IT audit. So I look at employee expenses. So that's one of our tests, is to look at employee expenses. And one of the employee expenses is meal costs. So our company allows you to, when you travel for business, so you're going on the business trip, you're going to be buying food or whatnot, you get to expense it and we're going to reimburse you for that cost. So I look at meal costs, for example, versus the number of guests who enjoyed that meal, right? So this is actually one of my tests, and this is fake data, but this is exactly how it looks like for me in Tableau. So I feed the data and I'll look at, on the x-axis is going to be my number of guests. So how many people were at the meal that you paid for? So of course, one would be here. So you're just eating alone, you're eating with somebody else, all the way up to 12 people. We have sometimes 25 and whatnot, bigger meals. And then the dollar amount. So you've got your dollar amount being at 100 all the way to 600, whatever the dollar amount is for that quarter, because we review it on a quarterly basis. And of course, the company has a rule. So you can only spend so much on the meal. So what you can do is plot this and then start adding a little bit of, add a line to it, because that line is where the company says you can or cannot. So here is where if I plotted this exactly on the line, that would be exactly following the company rules. So that means people who are above the line, they're following the rules, right? Or they're right under the line, we let them slip. That's good. They're almost following the rules. Now, people who are under the line, I would color them kind of yellow. I would say, okay, they're not following the rules exactly, but they're within a certain threshold. So the business has a certain threshold and says, all right, within maybe 5% or 10%, yes, it's a warning. Maybe it's an email that you send out to those employees saying, if there's only one or two people eating and spending, let's say $150 for a meal, that's an expensive meal. We don't really want to approve such an expensive meal. Now you've got these employees. So these employees are the ones who are one person eating a $500 meal. In Birmingham, Alabama, $500 for one person is extremely expensive. And for example, this would not follow the company standard, right? Company rules. So here you had a chart where you used the scatter plot. You were able to use the color to help visualize the story of these employees are good to go. They followed my rules, or they followed the company rules. The yellow, they're okay, but we might want to send a notification to them. And then the red ones are the ones that we're going to test. So this is how I could pull my population, like sample from that entire population, and isolate those that are the most at high risk, instead of choosing at random to sample. Of course, you can use color to drive the attention and use a border. So if you're presenting to management, for example, using a visual and saying, this is where all of our employees plotted, this is the line that indicates the company threshold, and then these red ones are the most at risk. So these are the ones that we're going to pull in as our sample and actually test. So another one that you might look at with employee expenses, once again, with internal audit, we look at employee expenses on a line chart, because we use the time periods in order to walk the person through a timeline of that person's spending. So for example, line charts are only used if you have a time period. So you cannot use a line chart if you don't have a time period. And that's because you're connecting those dots with a line. If the line is, or if your time period is not sequential, so the interval is not sequential. Here you see that I'm jumping from January to February to March to April, so it's sequential. Then you connect the dots or your data dots. If it's not sequential, if we skip a month, then you would not connect them, and you want to make sure you break the graph as well in order to make sure the person knows that you're jumping from one time period to another. And what's important here is there's a lot of dots, and we're trying to tell a story. And how this chart helps us tell a story is when we gray out everything else and we bring out the points of concern. So if you draw an average line, and I forgot to draw an average line here, but if there's an average line for an employee, and this would be just one employee and they're spending, let's say, within the past couple of years was from 100 to 1,000. And all of a sudden you see these dots at the very top, and you ask yourself, why do they spend more during those times of the year? And then you draw the line down and you realize they're usually spending more in January, or they're more expensing more in December, or once again, November, December, January. How we can look at it is during those months, those are usually holiday months in the United States. So a lot of people buy presents, they buy more food to invite people over to enjoy their celebrations. So this could potentially indicate fraud, because you can have employees who buy gift cards and then expense them out, saying that they bought those gift cards when they were traveling and they hit that limit. Well, when you add everything up, you might realize that they started buying $25 gift cards, even though they're only eating $10 worth of food, right? So the $15 is still, it hasn't been used. And that's because they went to a restaurant, bought a gift card, and they bought $25 worth of gift card because, let's say, your lunch expense, your maximum to spend during lunch is about $25. So to not get flagged, you would buy a gift card for $24.99 because it's right under the threshold. And then you would buy a couple of those and expense them out. Well, that adds up over time. And you can start seeing like, oh, they did that during the holiday times. So that might indicate that they're using those gift cards to purchase something else for personal use instead of just for business use. Then we talk about some bar charts. And bar charts tell a great story, and they're actually the most used around the world. If you put something in the bar chart, it's the chart that is read the fastest internationally. So that's because everyone knows how to interpret a bar chart, and it takes them less time to interpret it. So what we say here, it uses less of your cognitive effort in your brain to process a line chart or process a bar chart. And that's what you want to make sure is, as you're reading the charts, the reason you're creating the visuals is in order to minimize the time someone is looking at the data and interpreting the data. You want them to look at the chart and immediately know what you're trying to tell them, right? So when you're looking at a chart and it's taking you a long time to interpret what is the chart even showing me, that means it's not a good chart. You want to make sure that the chart is very clean and it drives your point. So here we have the vertical bars. And you go from this illustrates the story of employees in a company being enrolled in different benefits. So in the United States, you have to buy, you don't have to buy, but a lot of people purchase health insurance because it's not government subsidized, dental insurance, vision, so for your eyesight, and then life insurance. So on this chart, it tells us, okay, 80% of employees in this company, in this fictitious company, buy 80%, or 80% of the employees purchase health insurance, and the lowest is life insurance. The bar chart is fine, but you can make it a little better because, as you can tell, the axes at the very bottom are flipped, where you would have to turn your head in order to read it. You're actually, if you're using the vertical axis, that means you're slowing down your reader. And remember, we talked about how you want to make sure that the reader has the fastest way to get to the answer. So in order to speed up that process and make it much more helpful for the reader to be able to interpret the words and not have to spin their head, or you want to change the positioning of words. So here we went from just a vertical angle, so I guess 90 degrees, we changed it to about a 45-degree angle, and you're still slowing down the reader by about 50%. So the best case scenario as you're creating these visuals is turning those words in a horizontal manner. If every word is horizontal, then the reader can quickly get to your answer right by looking at this chart. So as you can tell, it's so much more easier to read the words health, dental, vision, and life now that we have flipped everything horizontally. Here's what would make it even better, is to flip the entire chart horizontally. And now you can have the reader read from left to right. Of course, that's also a question of culture. So you have to make sure that you adapt to, once again, your audience, who we discussed at the very beginning. And who is your audience? Does your audience read from left to right? Because if they don't read from left to right, this might not be appropriate for the audience. So for example, this example obviously stems from United States standards. In the United States, we would read from left to right. So this would be the best type of chart that we would be using. Now you can have a choice of a stacked bar. So a stacked bar is essentially just having a bar chart with those with different categories. So in this case, what we're looking at is those green bars indicate your full-time employees, and the gray bars just indicate other employees, whether they are part-time, contractor, intern, any of those, co-op. So I just want to tell the story of full-time employees, right? I can use the stacked bar, but I always say that if you're going to be using a stacked bar, make sure that you're using just one color versus others. So don't add too many variables into your chart, or else it's not going to make sense and it's going to be all over the place. You want to have a very clean story. And actually, this stacked bar chart is not the best. And the reason it's not the best is because the green, which is what I want to make sure you're seeing, it's floating in between the bars. So now how to fix this is actually very easy. You just want to drag those green variables, so these green parts, down to the bottom of your bar. So when you do that, you realize that the same amount of full-time employees sign up for your health and your dental plan. And then, of course, vision goes a little smaller and life goes a little smaller. But here, you were not able to see that in the previous bar chart. So when we look at those side by side, when you look at this one on the left-hand side, you were not able to tell that this bar is the same size as this bar. But when I was able to bring it down to start at the same baseline, you were able to say, all right, these two are the same. So that's why whenever you're using a stacked bar chart, make sure that whenever you do, you bring those bars to the very bottom and you minimize the amount of different variables and attributes of those variables down to potentially just two, really, just like I showed here. A lot of times I gray out information that is irrelevant. So when I'm comparing, for example, I've done a chart before where I compared Protective Life, so my company, against other life insurance companies. So what I would do is I would just color my company data because that's what management cares about. And then everybody else, all of our competitors, would be just grayed out. They can see that there's obviously a competitor for each portion of the line chart or the bar chart, but they don't need to know the actual the actual data behind it. They just know that we're either bigger or smaller than them and how they comprise that entire category. So a couple more before we head on to Q&A, and that's tree maps. So within a tree map, this is a relatively new way of visualizing things. I believe Excel now has it. So Excel should be able to give you a tree map. I know that Tableau and Power BI both have it. Here, we're just wanting to look at the type of employees that a company has. So you're looking at the size, and you're also using the color in order to help you out. So you know that the biggest block is your full-time employees, and your smallest block is your intern because it's the lightest green. However, what would make the chart much better is if you actually included the percentage breakdown, or if you included the number of employees. I actually include both. So people know how many employees are full-time employees, and then what is the percentage when you're using a tree map. So tree maps are more of an art than a science. More of the scientific charts are gonna be more of the line charts, scatter plots, bar charts. Now you're turning more into your art and using data for more of artistic charts. But these charts actually do very well in charts, and a lot of people are always interested and use them as well. So I like to call this portion dishonorable mentions. So that is the charts that I would either not use at all or use a little less of. So when we talk about these charts, they should not be the first charts that come to your mind. So pie charts, you can absolutely use a circle or a pie chart, but that shouldn't be the first option. So when we're looking, and this is the same data we just saw, we're looking at types of employees, and you've got your full-time, your part-time, your third party or contractor, some people call, and then your interns. When you're looking at this pie chart, you're forcing your reader to compare the angles of the pie. So it's actually pretty difficult for the person to gauge what the angle is if it's not anchored at the top. So here you can say, okay, it's over 50%, right? You're just guessing. It's over 50%. But if I told you what's the percentage here, you might say, okay, it's going to be less than 25. But what about this one? Is it like 15 or is it 20? What about this? So you're forcing the person to compare your angles. There's another chart that's very much the same, and it's called a donut chart. At least that's what it is in Excel here. So the donut chart forces the reader to compare the arcs, which are actually harder to compare than the angles of a pie chart. So when you're creating your visuals, make sure that this is more of my last ones that I'm going to use, I still use them. I do really, really enjoy using a pie chart, but it's not one of my first choices. How can you make a pie chart? So if you're choosing and saying, I want to make sure I use a pie chart or a donut chart appropriately, how can you make it appropriate? Great question. Great self-question, I guess. How can you fix a pie chart to make it usable? So number one, add the percentage, add the numbers onto the chart. This way people don't have to guess. Is this, remember when I was talking or saying the percentages earlier? I said, is it 15? Is it, right? It's actually 13. Let's just go ahead and put it on the chart, because it makes it, the person can just look at the chart and they're able to see the actual percentage. Now, here is where it makes this such a better chart. So this is bringing the legend onto the chart itself. And let me go back just one time back. When you were looking back and forth between the chart and the legend, your eyes were going back and forth, back and forth. So what is the lightest? The lightest is 10%. Oh, intern. So you had to go back and forth, right? It took you, even though it didn't take you a long time, it still took away seconds from a person knowing exactly what the information was on the chart. So you want to put your legend onto your pie chart. And this way you don't have to look back and forth. You see intern 10%, full-time 56%. Now you want to know, what kind of story are you telling? Here, it's a very general story. You're just telling me that 56% is full-time and everything else, like part-time is 21%. But what if you wanted to focus the person's attention onto one of the pieces of this chart? You could do that by graying out everything else. So now when you look at the chart, you just see the color and you're like, okay, full-time, 56%. This is what Alicja wanted me to see. She wanted me to see that there's 56% of my employees are full-time. That's what you're paying attention to. You forgot about the other sections of the donut chart. Or you can use the chart itself as an image, right? As kind of like an icon to help you visualize, but the story that you're telling is inside the circle. So now you have cleaned it all up. You have whited out everything else. You're just showing that green is 56%. And you put it into words, what you want the audience to know. And the audience, you're wanting them to know that 56% of the company is categorized as full-time. So here's your data, here's your visual, and here's the story, all into one pie chart. So that's exactly how you can use a pie chart to tell a data story. So here's one that I will say absolutely no. So do not use 3D charts. I will mark my words here. 3D charts are very hard to read. I mean, it's cool to look at them, right? But they're very difficult to read. And here's why. When you look at the 3D chart, let's take a look at what I just circled here. When you're looking at that one spot, are you looking here or are you looking here? So and the line curves. So what you have to do is you have to feel it out. Like, okay, so is it 4 or is it back there like 4.2? While you can figure it out, it's just so much harder for the person to read it because you're adding a 3D aspect to it. So not only are the numbers curved and you have to follow that line over, you have no idea which one you should follow. You should follow the front of the bar or the back of the bar, which the answer would be the front. But once again, let's just stick with 2-dimensional graphs, and there's no question of misinterpretation. So I wanted to close out with a couple of examples of why does this matter. So this I actually pulled from our audit committee materials. So in internal audit, we have to report up to, or we do report up to audit committee, and we present them with everything that has been going on. Of course, I blacked out the numbers because those are confidential, but here are just a couple of charts that I put on here, just so the audit committee can see what's going on. So for example, here is the findings. So this entire infographic, one-pager infographic that I use for visual purposes, I updated every quarter. So this is a very fresh one. This is from 1 quarter ago. You can see that the comparison of the bars from quarter to quarter to quarter. It could be a line chart, but because I had 3, it would have been 3 lines on one graph, and a bar just looked much better and cleaner. So what I blacked out are the numbers. So audit committee members don't have to guess what number this is. And they can see, so like here, okay, so let's say it was like 20, and let's say this is 2. So they say, okay, so there's a big drop, and then, right? And they can follow through. So new findings are in purple, open findings are in this gold, and then closed findings are in this blue. Then another chart, another line chart that helps the audit committee is to see average days of current open findings. So this is the open findings that we have and how long they have been open for. And I show them the average of days by quarter. So are we going up in how long it takes us to close a finding, or are we going down? What is our trend with internal audit? And then like a percentage of us extending remediation. I also chart our open findings on a heat map. So this allows management to know, where are our findings? Are the findings in red? So where your likelihood and your impact are at the highest, right? In that peak. Are they in the lowest, or are they in between? So where likelihood and impact are at about medium, and they can kind of see where those findings are, and the numbers according, or the number of the ID, the finding ID is the number that I blacked out, so they can correlate it back to the finding. And then also I use words. So here are the words, bullet points that I just put the words. What are the finding themes for this quarter? Was it change management? Was it incident management? Was it something cybersecurity related? So I just put the words there so they can see the words, they can just read them. And it's very clear and to the point what kind of data, and they have a trending analysis for over a year. And then last but not least, this is actually our audit report. Our audit reports are about 3 pages long. We boil it down to just 3 pages of most important information because we're using storytelling to tell the story here. So of course your audit report is your very like, who's it going to? The CCS carbon copy. So who's also receiving the report, and then the audit team. So all of our names. Number 1, this little piece is our background. This is all we have, just 2 paragraphs worth of words to describe what are we even auditing, or what's the background of this area. Then we have the scope, and within the scope is we list all of the time, or what did we look at during this audit? Did we look at change management? Did we look at incidents? Did we look at segregation of duties, right? So we would list them out with each one of the bullet points. And then our conclusion is our concluding statement. How many findings did we have? And what are the findings around? Remember when I told you the story, you start from the beginning and then you can throw in the bad news. In this case, I guess in internal audit's case, the bad news would be the finding. Here, while we don't throw it right at you, we put the conclusion statement on the front of the report because we do have a lot of management that wants to just see that outcome, right? So here's where our outcome is. So you already know that there's going to be 3 reportable findings right at the beginning of the report. Then we, of course, look at some key risks, and we do a little drop down of, okay, so we tested some controls and they actually drop down the residual risk. Here's page number 2. Page number 2 is all about the metrics. So whatever we audited, we looked at, we get to draw whatever metrics we want. So it really is all about what kind of metrics are in that area. All of our metrics look different from each area. So we do not, a lot of times we do not replicate the metrics. Every report has a unique set. Sometimes we replicate like the team, the HR metrics, human resources metrics. So about how many, once again, full-time employees, how many full-time employees does the team have? What is their tenure, to show management the makeup of the team. And then the third page, some people flip to that one first. So it's really all about who is your audience? Do they want to see the findings first? And then at the very end, we put, or page number 3 are the findings. And this is where we put the findings. You've got your ABC, which correlate to ABC. We drop them in, we visualize it so they know that while obviously the findings are not insignificant, they're also not ones that are in the red, but they're still a medium, so they're still a moderate risk to the company. So they're plotted in this yellow part of the metric. And once again, it's impact versus likelihood. And then of course, at the bottom, this is where you would actually describe what the findings are. So your observation, your business response, and then who's the owner of this finding, and when is the completion date or remediation date going to take place. And then further reading. I love books. I love reading and learning more things. And I wanted to make sure that I give you some good titles to look at. If you're wanting to learn more about storytelling with data, this book right here, that's like the gold mine. It has all types of knowledge. I always recommend this book. Effective data storytelling. This is a wonderful book as well. Brent Dykes was the person who I quoted from that MIT article. He wrote this book. And then the last one is to help you come up with different ideas about dashboards. If you're building dashboards, this big book of dashboards is amazing. It's going to help you get some ideas into what type of data you have and what type of visualizations you can create with the data that you have at hand. And of course, I would love to connect. Please, the QR code goes or links straight to my LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm fairly active there. And I would love to connect and keep this conversation going. So yeah, that's it. That is a lot of data visualization. That is a lot of data storytelling. So I'm ready for any questions that might have come through.
Thank you so much, Alicja. That was great, really. Let me check if we have any question. Let's give our participants a little bit time till they maybe raise a question. Meanwhile, maybe I can have one question on my mind. You actually, so lots of examples, a lot of good examples to show how to specify what you are aiming to tell, and also lots of examples to avoid the unnecessary information. And I think there is one very critical line between them to don't fall this scenario. How you can differentiate this situation before getting an expert in that data visualization. For example, if I go tomorrow, if we would like to make one chart in the reporting, how I will understand if I give too many information that is unnecessary or too less information that is not specifying what I would like to tell.
Great question. And what I do is I make a lot of people look at my charts. So I give the charts to our internal audit management. There's there's three managers, and there's a a chief audit executive and there's other staff members, what I do is I draw up the chart and then I show them and I say, what story does this chart tell? And they have to tell me. I close my mouth and I listen. And if it's what I want the story to be, then that's where we keep it. I usually about probably between 3 to 6 people look at my charts and they give a lot of feedback. There's a lot of changes to be made. That one example around our findings, that infographic about the findings, I think I changed that about 12 times before we had it exactly correct. Another thing that what I do is we pull, so ask questions of management. So our business owners, we ask our audit committee, what do you want to see? What are, and this is how our audit report, so our audit report, that very visual audit report of just 3 pages, it was created because we asked the CFO, and so Chief Financial Officer, we asked him, what do you want to see on an audit report? We asked our Chief Operations Officer, what do you want to see in the audit report? And they were able to tell us, like, I want to see the findings. That was the number one. They want to see findings, but they want to see how did the implementation of controls minimize or mitigate the risk. So that's why those little bars at the bottom were created to show that we tested 15 controls, and because they were mostly effective, they changed by like 32%. They lowered the risk. Then they wanted to see some metrics around their area. So we were able to add an entire page full of metrics. So it was really necessary to involve them also in the conversation because they drove what items are going to be reflected into the report.
I understand. Feedback is essential here. I understand. Thank you.
Yes.
There's another question. Which tools did you have experience or may recommend to query data and create instant visualizations?
Great question. So for instant visualizations, I would suggest either Tableau or Power BI. Those are global tools, I believe, and I use both of them. I primarily use Tableau, but now our company just went and got the enterprise version of Power BI. So that's a Microsoft tool, Microsoft Power BI. That's what I'm learning to use, but I'm more well-versed in Tableau. Another, what we use is, I use Excel sometimes. A simple Excel chart can get you very far. So what I actually showed you, the metrics on the audit report, that was created in Excel. The entire dashboard that I used to create those finding metrics for our audit committee, that was used in Excel. So that was built in Excel. So just Excel is going to get you very far. I also use ACL, so Audit Command Language, which is, I think now they rebranded to either Galvanize or Diligent. But if you type in ACL Analytics, you will be able to find, it doesn't create beautiful visualizations, but it's going to be very helpful to query a very large data set. So if you are working with 80+ million data rows, that's going to help you, because Excel has a limitation of 1 million something. And if you have more, you can't use Excel. But with ACL, that's what I use, and I'm able to query that data.
Perfect. Thank you, Alicja. As I check again to chats, I think we do not have more questions, and we are just in time. That's perfect. Thank you so much. But before closing it, I would like to remind again our participants, please do not forget to fill out the survey to claim a CPE. The survey link is on the chat available. And Alicja, again, thank you so much for this great presentation. It's really, really useful. I think that I also take my notes. And thank you so much for accepting our invitation as well. As İSACA Istanbul, we are very thankful.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. I'm honored that I was asked to participate from across the ocean. And again, I want to wish everyone a happy Ramadan.
Thank you so much, Alicja. Thank you.
Have a great
nice
night.
day for you and have a nice evening for our participants.
Absolutely. Bye.
Bye-bye.